And Democratic Congressman Gerald Nadler of New York is a supporter of the Occupy movement. So, Congressman, I don't know if you could hear Kevin Hassett, but I'd like to know what you think of his views of this plan. He said it's theft from the government.
Well, his views are off the wall, and I didn't recognize much of the facts. First of all, there are two changes being made. Under current law, people who owe student debt and can't pay it otherwise, they're limited to 15% of their salary, and after 25 years of paying 15% of their salary, the rest of the debt is forgiven. Congress last year said that starting in 2014, they'd only have to, I said 15% of their salary. Starting in 2014, under an act of Congress passed last year, this will be limited. They'll only have to pay 10% of their salary if they can't afford more than that, and anything after 20 years will be forgiven. All the president is announcing now is that they're moving that up from 2014 to next year, so that people will have to pay 10% of their salary, if that's less than their normal payments, for at least 20 years before the balance is forgiven. Hold on a second,
because you say all the president is announcing. I mean, it's going in the direction of putting taxpayers more on the hook than we already are, no?
Well, it's not a huge change, because that was the 10% limit on garnishment of wages, or a 10% limit on wages, and 20 years is already the law starting in 2014.
But, Congressman, isn't this always the way things start? It starts with, it's not a lot of money, and it's drip, 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 and after a while, we're trillions of dollars in a hole.
No, because we saved $60 billion. What we saved, literally $60 billion by the change that Congress made, because as the guest, I don't know who he was, but as the guest...
Kevin Hassett, who's been looking into this issue for years and years, Congressman. He's a very wise person on this subject.
Well, he may be. I don't think he's wise. He sounds off the wall to me. But as he said, Congress changed the law last year and removed the banks as the middleman. The banks were lending money to students. The federal government was guaranteeing the loan, so the bank took no risk, but got $60 billion over the entire time period for their servicing. The federal government, under the law change last year or 2 years ago, will make all the loans directly, and that extra $60 billion is $60 billion of saving to the taxpayer, which will be spent in the form of more loans and of lower interest rates.
Yeah, but those estimates are the actual head of the CBO himself, Doug Elmendorf, said that estimate was bogus because he was forced to use federal rules that ignored the true costs of defaults. Defaults have been increasing on these loans, and because the CBO estimate wasn't allowed to use the true cost of the defaults, he called the estimates bogus. This is Doug Elmendorf.
Well, I don't know about that. All I know is that was the CBO estimate at the time, and the defaults have increased, given the current depression, from 7% to 8.8%, and given the current depression, that's not surprising. When we get out of it, when the economy comes back, presumably the default rate will go down.
But how are we going to get out of it if we're getting more into debt as a result of this?
Well, because that's a whole different discussion, but debt is not the cause of the current economic problem. The cause of the current and frankly, to get out of it, we have to get into some more debt temporarily. The cause of the current economic crisis is that because of the reckless housing bubble that was built up by the banks and so forth,
a little reckless spending on the part of Congress too. Wouldn't you at least admit that?
No, because I don't think it had anything to do with spending.
You don't think spending by Congress has anything to do with this? Overspending, overpromising everybody, including the mortgage industry, by the way.
The mortgage industry, I don't think spending is the cause of the current economic crisis at all. Whether it's overspending or not is a separate discussion, but I don't think it had anything to do with causing the crisis. The crisis was caused by the fact that the housing bubble burst, basically because of the private sector recklessness.
We're getting into housing. We're getting into housing, and I want to keep it at least on student loans for one more point. Okay. Congress and the final issue of whether the president decides the terms of this new agreement or whether Congress gets involved. Of course, the president has decided to do it on his own. Shouldn't Congress be involved in making this decision? Congress is supposed to hold the purse strings, right?
Well, I don't know anything about this other than a quick read of a press release. The details details are coming out tomorrow. But if the president is doing this on his own, he can only do it because Congress passed a law that allowed him to do it at some point. Otherwise, he couldn't do it. He'd need to go to Congress. So this is obviously being done pursuant to legislation that Congress passed probably last year.
All right, Congressman Jerry Nadler, we thank you for coming in, sir. Appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.